Welcome to APUS History with Lennox. I'm Lennox, and today we're diving straight into APUS History Topic 1.6, where we're going to discuss the cultural interactions between the Spanish, the Native Americans, and Africans. Now, if you know anything about Spanish colonization during the 1500s, you realize that the Spanish dominated the Americas during this time. And this dominance allowed them to shape a colonial culture that not only will drive the Spanish colonization of the Americas, but also other colonizers as they come in. Part of the reason for this is the Spanish not only dominated in their land holdings, they dominated the people who lived there. And that's the Native Americans. As a result of this, you're going to see a caste system or a new social hierarchy being established in the Spanish colonies that will be duplicated or replicated in other colonial regions. Now, as we look at Spanish expansion throughout the Americas, one of the driving forces for colonization was the spreading of the Catholic religion and the conversion of the Native Americans. To accomplish this, the Spanish sent missionaries or Franciscan priests who came to the Americas with the sole intent of converting Native Americans to Catholicism. The problem is the cultures clashed. It's one thing to say we're going to convert you, but that's really difficult if we don't understand you. If you look at the main differences between Native Americans and the Spanish, you can see the foundation of the problems that will exist between these groups of people throughout this entire time period. For example, the Spanish were monotheistic and they practiced Catholicism. On the other hand, the natives were more pantheistic, where they worshiped nature and they worshiped different gods. And so right away you can see there's a conflict there. But beyond that, look at how the two entities viewed land. The Spanish and Europeans, for that matter, believed that land was a commodity, that it should be privately owned, and land equals power. Native Americans had a completely different view of land. They didn't think you could own land. They believed that land was communal property, that it was there for everyone to use. And then finally, look at the family unit. For the Native Americans, families were based on kinship, and tribes were built around large kinship ties where you have 70, 100, 200 people along those lines. Now, the Europeans understood kinship. However, they focused their family unit on the nuclear family, mother, father, kids, and so on. So in these three categories, you have vast difference between these two cultures, which is going to make it very difficult to find common ground. They did find some common ground. There was some cultural acceptance from both sides. For example, the Native Americans, they loved the metal tools and the weaponry that the Europeans brought in. They especially loved the introduction of the horse because that completely transformed their way of life. The Europeans, on the other hand, well, they appreciated the Native Americans for their fur trade, and they saw value in that, and they actually bought into some of those kinship ties within the fur trade in that they married into Native American families. But the differences completely overwhelmed the similarities. And these differences led to a lot of misunderstandings. These differences led to a lot of conflicts. Let's get back to this idea of conversion. One Native American tribe that did accept conversion was the Pueblo. Now, the Pueblo were located in modern-day New Mexico and Arizona, and they did allow the Franciscan priests to come in and share the gospel with them, and they accepted Jesus into their cadre of gods, if you will. Well, that's not exactly what the whole idea of conversion was about. You see, as a Christian, when you accept Jesus as your Savior, you're rejecting all other gods. The Pueblos weren't willing to do that. They were willing to accept Jesus, but they wanted him as part of their religion, not their entire religion. And so there's conflict there, and what you're going to start seeing is some of these priests are going to try to forcefully convert the Pueblos, causing some conflict. Then some other things started to happen, not necessarily having anything to do with the Spanish. For example, There were droughts. Crops failed. The Pueblos started to be attacked by their enemies. And they started thinking, when did all this start? And they kind of jumped to, well, it was kind of when those Spanish folks showed up and started talking to us about their religion. That must be the problem. And so this is going to lead to the Pueblo Revolt that took place in 1680. Led by a Pueblo shaman by the name of Pope, the Pueblos are going to band their tribes together and revolt against the Spanish. They will see some success. In fact, they're actually going to drive the Spanish out of their region, albeit temporarily. During the revolt, they killed hundreds of Spanish and they burned down all the Spanish churches. However, 12 years later, the Spanish returned to regain control. But this time when the Spanish came back, a little bit more flexibility. They allowed the Pueblo to hang on to some of their traditions, hoping to avert a revolt in the future. The Pueblo Revolt and other conflicts kind of put a spotlight on the Spanish method of conquering the Native Americans. As we talked about in a previous lecture, when the Spanish came in, they instituted what was known as the Encomienda System. And under the Encomienda System, Native Americans were working as forced labor or as slaves. Now, there were two sides to a debate about whether or not this was good or bad. There started to be questions about the brutality of the Encomienda System. And these questions were raised by a Franciscan priest by the name of Bartolomé de las Casas. This is a name you need to know. De las Casas is going to go to the Spanish nobility and make a case that what we're doing here is not only are we mistreating the Native Americans, but we're actually setting ourselves up to lose their souls. Because who's going to want to convert if you're being mistreated? And not only that, you're kind of giving Christianity a bad name. Well, the other side of the argument says, oh, no. What we're doing is a favor because as we grow our colonies over in the Americas, we're bringing more wealth to Spain. And that wealth is going to make its way back to the Americas, which will eventually help the Native Americans. Yeah, because that idea always works. Anyway, in the end, the nobility does bring an end to the Encomienda System. But here's the fallout. The Spanish still needed a labor force. And who is going to fill that role? It's going to be the African slaves. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the African slaves going forward, but what you need to understand is their entry into the Americas happened right here in this time period. So there it is, topic 1.6, the cultural interaction of the Spanish, the Native Americans, and the Africans. I appreciate you watching. If you like what you saw, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. If you have any questions, post them down below in the comments, and I'll get to them as quick as I can. Other than that, we'll see you on the next one. Go make some history.